Outside the courthouse, the wind pressed against the stone steps like a silent protest. Cold and sharp as judgment, Ghost lay unmoving beside a black patrol car, his silver-gray fur bristling each time the doors creaked open and strangers spilled out. But none of them were Noah. The German shepherd's amber eyes never blinked, fixed like a sniper's scope on the building's front doors. Officers passed him warily, some giving wide berth, others casting nervous glances, but no one dared approach. He wasn't aggressive. He was waiting. Waiting like he had for hours back at base, muzzle pressed to the dirt, tail still, ears twitching only when gunfire cracked in the distance. Ghost didn't understand betrayal, but he understood patterns. Noah had walked into that building in chains, and something in Ghost's bones told him it wasn't going to end with a handshake and freedom. A soft whine escaped his throat, barely audible over the traffic hum, but filled with something ancient, grief. He shifted his paws but didn't rise. He was trained to obey, trained to wait, trained to follow only one man's voice. But that voice hadn't called for him. Not yet. Across the street, a mother tugged her daughter away from the dog, whispering something about military animals and danger. Ghost didn't flinch. His eyes never left the door. Inside that courthouse, the humans spoke in rules and ranks, but out here, Ghost's world was simple. Noah goes in, he comes out. That was the order of things. But minutes turned into hours and the scent in the air shifted, sweat, stress, the oily residue of fear. Ghost's nose twitched. His ears lifted slightly. The door opened again. Not Noah. A clerk, then a journalist, then a pause, a long one, and then the kind of stillness that always came before a fight. Ghost stood slowly, every muscle drawing tight, tail lifted like a flag on the edge of a battlefield. Something was wrong, deep wrong, his paws pressed against the pavement as if bracing for recoil. The leash he wasn't wearing didn't matter. Ghost had already chosen his post. He wasn't going home, not without Noah. And if no one inside would let him in, then maybe it was time someone out here made them listen. The courthouse doors burst open with a sharp creak that sliced through the morning stillness like a warning shot. A pair of bailiffs stepped out first, flanking the judge as murmurs from inside spilled out like smoke after a blast. But before anyone else could follow, a blur of muscle and fury shot forward. Ghost. He moved like he had in combat, silent, fast, decisive. 1 second he was by the patrol car, the next his paws were thundering against the courthouse floor, claws clacking like shell casings on marble. Shouts rang out as startled civilians staggered back, one woman dropping her purse, papers scattering like fallen leaves. "Get that dog," a security officer yelled, but no one moved. Not yet, because Ghost didn't attack. He didn't lunge. He stared. He planted himself like a statue at the center of the courtroom, breath low, chest rising and falling in deliberate rhythm, as if every inhale was a countdown. His eyes locked not on the crowd, not on the judge, but on the prisoner at the center of it all. Noah. For a split second, no one breathed. Noah's head lifted slowly, his eyes wide as they met Ghost's. His lips parted, a whisper caught in his throat. "Ghost?" he said, like the name itself might break the chains holding him. Ghost's tail didn't wag. His ears were pinned back, and then he barked. Once, loud, sharp, clean. Not the kind of bark a dog makes when he's happy. It was the kind that precedes chaos, the kind that meant something was wrong. Gasps swept through the courtroom. Ghost barked again, louder, and this time there was urgency in it. He turned from Noah and faced the bench, his stance low, protective, his body shifting like he was shielding something unseen. Control that animal, the judge snapped, raising his gavel, but it froze midair because Ghost wasn't barking at nothing. His gaze was fixed, his body angled toward the gallery. And then he moved, slowly pacing toward the far side of the room, each step heavy, deliberate. Noah tried to speak, but emotion strangled his voice. He knew this behavior. He'd seen it in the field, moments before Ghost unearthed landmines or spotted insurgents hidden in plain sight. Ghost wasn't just causing a scene, he was issuing a warning. Something was in that courtroom, something no one else could see. But Ghost could feel it, and he wasn't going to stop until everyone else did too. Noah's heart slammed against his ribs, a dull drumbeat of disbelief and recognition. That bark, he had heard it before, not during training, not at home, but on the battlefield, seconds before the world went sideways, before Ghost yanked him back from a buried IED, before a sniper's bullet passed inches from his skull. That bark meant danger, not imagined, not emotional, real. The courtroom froze around them, an entire audience of strangers gripped by something they couldn't explain. Ghost wasn't just making noise. He was sounding an alarm. "Ghost, heal!" Noah said, his voice cracking under the weight of everything unraveling. But the dog didn't budge. He was staring straight into the gallery now, muscles coiled, chest puffed. The same body language he'd used on patrol, on alert, but not attacking. Yet. "That dog is unstable," the prosecutor snapped, stepping forward with a hand outstretched, like Ghost was something to be swatted away. But then Ghost moved, not toward the judge, not toward the guards, but toward a man seated quietly near the back row. The man's suit was pressed, his posture polished, but Ghost had already seen through it. He barked again, louder this time, his paws hammering the ground as he stopped a foot from the man's seat. A growl vibrated in his throat. The man didn't flinch, but he didn't meet Ghost's eyes either. "Get him out of here," the prosecutor ordered again, but the judge held up a hand. "Wait!" Silence snapped back into the room like a rubber band. The judge looked from Ghost to the man. "Do you know this dog?" The man gave a weak smile, shrugged. "Just a military mutt," he muttered. But Noah's voice broke through like a gunshot. "That's Colonel Travis Mason," he said, breathless. "He gave the orders during Operation Sundown." The room shifted. The atmosphere changed. The name hit like a ripple across a pond. "I was court-martialed for deserting that mission," Noah continued, his eyes locked on Mason. "But I didn't run. I was ordered to pull back. Ghost was there. He heard it. He knows." Mason finally looked up, and for the first time his face cracked. A flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "This is absurd," he said, rising slowly. But Ghost growled deeper, sharper, stepping in front of him like a wall of muscle and judgment. Noah's eyes never left the colonel. "He told me to retreat. Then he told command I'd gone rogue. That's why I'm here." The judge leaned forward slowly. "Colonel Mason, I think it's time you and I had a very long conversation." The man stood slowly, his movement too casual for the tension choking the room. Noah's breath caught again. Colonel Travis Mason looked older than he had on the field, but Noah would never forget that face. The sharp jaw, the eyes that hid too much, the voice that sent men into fire, and then disappeared behind silence. Ghost took a step closer, his growl low and unrelenting, vibrating through the floor like distant thunder. "Colonel Mason," the judge said carefully, "you've been identified by the defendant. Do you have a response?" Mason forced a half smile, straightening the cuffs of his pristine jacket. I'm not here in any official capacity, he said. Just a curious observer. But his voice was too even, too rehearsed. Noah felt the heat rise in his chest. You told me to fall back, he said, the words sharp and brittle. You said reinforcements were coming, and when I obeyed, you told command I deserted. You destroyed my record, my life. The courtroom was still, the kind of stillness that only exists between lies and the moment they break. Mason's eyes flicked to the judge, then to the bailiffs, then to Ghost, who had not moved an inch. I don't recall any such order, Mason said. If there was confusion on the field, that's unfortunate, but it hardly changes the facts. Ghost heard it, Noah shot back. He was there, he remembers. You think he forgot what you did? The colonel's expression faltered for a heartbeat, just long enough to betray the storm beneath. The judge leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the bench. Colonel Mason, this court takes allegations of falsified military testimony very seriously. I'm ordering a recess and a private deposition. You will join me in chambers immediately. Mason didn't move. Ghost did. He stepped directly in front of him, muscles tight, stance rigid, eyes locked with the kind of intensity that didn't come from instinct, but from memory. Mason finally turned stiffly and followed the bailiff toward the judge's chambers. As the door shut behind him, Noah felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but the first crack in the wall that had caged him for months. He looked at Ghost, who now stood calmly by his side, his job, at least for now, done. You found him, Noah whispered, kneeling beside the dog, hand pressed to the thick fur at his neck. You never forgot, even when everyone else did. Ghost nuzzled into him, not seeking affection, but anchoring him. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, someone was finally listening. The side room was dim, its overhead light casting a sterile glow over the wood panel walls. The judge sat behind a narrow desk, face unreadable, hands folded. Two bailiffs flanked the door, arms crossed, eyes locked on Colonel Mason like they were waiting for a reason. Mason remained standing, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the judge and the recorder, now blinking red on the desk. Ghost lay at Noah's feet, still and silent, but his presence pulsed like a warning through the room. Noah kept his eyes on Mason, fists clenched at his sides. Colonel, the judge began, voice even, you've been identified by Mr. Briggs and his canine as a central figure in the events leading to this conviction. I suggest you cooperate. Mason gave a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. With respect, Your Honor, I'm not on trial here. That can change, the judge replied sharply. He gestured to the recorder. Tell us what happened. Off the record, for now. Mason exhaled slow and deliberate, then leaned back against the wall. Operation Sundown was messy, he began. Intel changed last minute. There was a drone strike we didn't authorize. Chaos in the field. Command got nervous. You gave me the retreat order, Noah cut in. You said backup was 10 minutes out. I pulled my men back. You never logged the order. Because I was told not to, Mason snapped, then immediately shut his mouth, realizing too late what he'd admitted. Ghost lifted his head. He didn't bark, but a growl slipped through his throat, low and unrelenting. Told by who? The judge asked. Mason didn't answer. The silence stretched. Who buried the order? Noah pressed. Who set me up? Mason's hands twitched. It came from above, he said finally. I was the messenger. They needed a fall guy to keep the mission quiet. You had the cleanest record. You were believable. The words landed like a punch. Noah stared, stunned. 15 years of service reduced to a convenient lie. And Ghost? The judge asked. Mason's gaze flicked to the dog. That mutt remembered. Too well. There was talk about retiring him early, disappearing him. Ghost growled again, deeper now. But they never did, Mason added quickly. He was too high profile. The judge stood. That's enough for now. We'll review this testimony and verify what we can. He turned to the bailiffs. Escort Colonel Mason to a secure holding area. He's not going anywhere. As Mason was let out, Noah looked down at Ghost. The dog was still watching the door, ears tilted forward. He hadn't forgotten, and now, finally, neither would anyone else. The drive back to the courthouse felt longer than it should have. Noah sat in the rear of the government vehicle, his hands unclenched now, but shaking slightly with the weight of truth finally dragging itself into daylight. Ghost lay beside him, head on his paws, unmoving except for the occasional twitch of an ear. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Words had already done enough damage. Now it was time for proof. When they arrived, Sarah Delgado was waiting. She was one of the few left in the system who still believed justice was worth chasing. She didn't smile when she saw Noah. She nodded, sharp, respectful, and then held up a flash drive. It's real, she said, voice low. Mason's name, a timestamp, a buried order that never made it past internal review. Someone tried to delete it last month. Guess who flagged it? Her eyes drifted to Ghost. He led me straight to the cabinet, scratched at it until I opened the damn thing. Noah felt his chest tighten. Ghost had remembered, not just the people, the place. We'll verify chain of custody, she continued, handing the drive to the judge. But this cracks it wide open. The judge looked at the device in his palm like it was a live grenade. Where was it stored? Old archive room, sub-basement, Sarah replied. No cameras, but the metadata's intact. Matches the day of Operation Sundown. Mason's voice is in the audio logs. So is his authorization code. The judge glanced at Noah, then at Ghost, who now sat upright, alert but calm. We'll reconvene tomorrow. I'll motion for a full evidentiary hearing. Noah nodded, silent. He couldn't find the words. Not yet. As Sarah turned to leave, she paused. There's something else, she said. Ghost didn't just find the cabinet. He zeroed in on one box. Inside was a shredded printout. Someone tried to destroy it, but it had a secondary confirmation of the withdrawal order. Mason sent it. Then the page was torn and dumped under old training manuals. If Ghost hadn't, her voice faded. They all knew what that meant. Noah crouched beside Ghost, resting a hand on his side. You didn't just remember, he whispered. You knew where to. Look. Ghost blinked slowly, leaned into him. For all the noise they had endured, this moment was quiet, not empty, just full of something no one could see but them. The truth wasn't just spoken, it was found. And Ghost had never stopped searching. Noah stood straighter than he had in months, not because the chains were gone, they were, but because for the first time since that cursed mission, someone believed him. Not just believed, knew. The courtroom was packed now, not with quiet onlookers, but with a crowd that leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, breath shallow. Reporters lined the back wall, their lenses trained not on Noah, but on the dog beside him. Ghost sat calmly at attention, unshaken by the murmurs or the dozens of flashbulbs that flickered like distant artillery fire. To him, this wasn't theater. This was just another mission. The judge adjusted his glasses. the flash drive resting like a loaded weapon beside his gavel. "Mr. Briggs," he began, voice steady, "based on new evidence and corroborating digital records, this court hereby vacates your conviction." A ripple passed through the room, not loud, not explosive, just breath catching in hundreds of throats at once. Noah didn't smile. He turned his head and looked down at Ghost. The shepherd didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the floor. "Let the record show," the judge continued, "that Sergeant Ghost, military K-9 unit, was instrumental in uncovering this evidence. Without his detection, this exculpatory material might have remained hidden indefinitely." The words hung in the air like a rising flag. Applause started at the back, hesitant at first, then grew louder, fuller until it swept through the room like a tide of long overdue justice. Ghost didn't flinch. He didn't look around. He just stared forward, chest out, still locked in posture. A soldier through and through, as the bailiffs moved to escort Colonel Mason back to holding, the crowd's attention shifted. Mason didn't speak. He didn't protest. His face was pale now, the corners of his mouth twitching with a mix of defeat and disbelief. His fall had begun, not with a confession, but with the unrelenting memory of a dog. Outside the courthouse, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the marble steps. Noah stepped into the sun, blinking hard, the weight of everything hitting him at once. Ghost walked beside him closer than usual, brushing against his leg like a silent anchor. Noah dropped to one knee, wrapped his arms around the dog, and held on. No cheers, no camera flashes, just breath, just heartbeats, just the kind of silence that meant something had finally ended. Or maybe something more important had just begun. The crowd had thinned, but the weight of the moment hadn't lifted. Noah stood just outside the courthouse steps, the sun warming his face for the first time in what felt like years. Ghost sat beside him, posture firm, though his eyes softened every time they turned toward Noah. Reporters still hovered at the edges, their questions bouncing off the invisible shield Noah had learned to wear, but none of them dared step too close. Not with Ghost watching. Sarah approached from behind, a thin folder tucked under her arm and purpose in her stride. "They're calling for a full review of Operation Sundown," she said, voice low. "Every file, every command, every name." Mason was just the beginning. Noah nodded, his eyes still fixed ahead. "Good," he said, "but it won't bring back the men we lost." She didn't argue. She just stood beside him in silence. After a beat, she added, "They're asking if you'd testify before the Senate. It could change everything for other vets caught in the system." Noah glanced down at Ghost. The dog's ears flicked toward him, as if already waiting for the answer. "Only if he comes too," Noah said. "He's the one they'll listen to." Sarah smiled, brief but real. "Then I'll make sure he gets his own chair." As she walked off, Noah knelt beside Ghost, his hand resting gently behind the dog's ear. "You ready for one more mission?" he asked. Ghost didn't bark, didn't move, but his eyes locked with Noah's, steady and certain. That was the answer. Later that afternoon, they returned to base, what was left of it. The old training yard had been cleared for a small, private ceremony. No brass bands, no salutes, just a folded flag, a new medal, and a plaque that now bore both their names. Noah stood in uniform, dress blues polished but simple. He didn't speak. He let the silence honor the years that had been stolen. A commanding officer stepped forward, pinning the medal to Ghost's harness with trembling hands. "For bravery, loyalty, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth." Applause followed, quiet but powerful. Ghost didn't react. He just leaned slightly into Noah's leg, his body still, his presence speaking volumes. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the field, Noah looked down at his partner and whispered, "Let's go home." Ghost rose without a sound, fell into step beside him, and together they walked toward whatever came next. Not just survivors, but soldiers still standing. The wind rustled through the pines like a whisper of something long buried, now finally free. Noah stepped through the cabin doorway and let it close behind him with a quiet click, the kind of sound that meant no more alarms, no more orders, just silence earned. Ghost was already stretched out by the porch, his eyes half-lidded, but tracking every flicker of movement in the woods. Not because he had to, because it was instinct. Even here, even now, he guarded. Noah moved through the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps. Not because he was tired, but because his body had spent so long moving for survival, it had forgotten what it felt like to just move for the sake of it. He poured water into a metal bowl, slid it onto the porch, and watched Ghost rise, tail swaying as he lapped it up without urgency. For a moment, Noah didn't see the scars, didn't feel the weight of the uniform folded in a trunk upstairs. He saw the dog who had run headfirst into a courtroom and changed the trajectory of his life with nothing but a bark, a single sound that cracked open the lies. "You knew," Noah said, crouching beside him. "You always knew." Ghost looked at him, head tilting ever so slightly, and nudged his hand with a soft nudge of his snout, then settled again beside him, leaning his weight against the man's leg as if to say, "You're not carrying this alone anymore." The sky turned lavender, streaked with gold as the last of the day disappeared behind the hills. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, no cars, no footsteps, no orders over the radio, just the pulse of quiet that wrapped around them like a final salute. Noah pulled in a breath and let it go slowly, tasting something in the air he hadn't in years, freedoms without condition. He sat down beside Ghost in the dirt, back against the porch post, arms draped loosely over his knees. Ghost shifted, laid his head in Noah's lap, and exhaled a long, contented breath that melted into the stillness like a signature. "We're not running anymore," Noah whispered, not to himself, not to the sky, but to the only soul who had followed him through hell and never once looked back. Ghost didn't move. He didn't need to. His silence was its own kind of vow. They had fought, they had endured, they had survived, and now finally they rested.